All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Art. I'm Ali Wagner, manager of studio programming, and I am excited to have this opportunity to explore the thought-provoking artwork and perspectives of Isabel Lu. Isabel is a Chinese-American visual artist and health equity researcher. She offers a blend of artistic expression and academic background with a bachelor's degree in Western nutritional science from Cornell and a master's degree in public health and dietetics from UNC. Isabel brings a wealth of knowledge in both scientific and the cultural aspects of food, drawing inspiration from BIPOC food justice leaders, traditional Chinese medicinal practices, and her own personal experience. Isabel's work delves into the intricate connections between ethnicity, gender identity, history, and food. Her exploration prompts us to question the notions of science, evidence, and truth by paralleling and contrasting Eastern and Western perspectives. Furthermore, Isabel has made significant contributions to the artistic community of the Triangle as the 2022 Artist in Residence at DIG and the 2023 Emerging Artist in Residence at Artspace Raleigh. These experiences have allowed her to develop a participatory body of work and engage in community-driven art aimed at supporting the well-being of Asian American creatives and communities in North Carolina. Today, in place of a demo, Isabel's going to be giving an artist talk, and we're going to follow it up with a brief interview. By gaining insights from Isabel, we hope to uncover the power of art and challenge norms, bridge cultural divides, and foster a sense of community. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Isabel, she'll be offering a workshop at NCMA, Culinary Brushstrokes, Depicting Food and Identity in the Dutch Exhibition with Isabel Lu, and that's going to be Saturday, November 11th from 10 to 4. Tickets are not for sale yet, but they will be on sale very soon. So keep an eye out for that. Without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Isabel. You ready to go, Isabel?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm super excited to be here with NCMA. I will share my screen and just start my presentation. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, like Oliver said, my name is Isabel Lu. I'm very excited to be here. I am a visual artist, community organizer, and researcher that blends artistic expression, identity, gender, sexuality, ethnicity with community engaged research and organization. Yeah, so here I kind of talked about my background, so I'll go over this pretty quickly, but so I am a first-gen Chinese American. I was born and raised in North Carolina. My parents are both from Beijing, China. So in Greensboro, I was always like that art kid. Like I was literally drawing all the time. Super quiet, but I went to Weaver Academy in Greensboro, which is a public magnet school for visual and performing arts, where I concentrated in visual arts. So a lot of my, I'm mostly self-taught, but a lot of my training has come from the time I spent at Weaver Academy. When I turned 18 and it was time to start applying to college, my parents were actually very supportive of me going to an art school actually. But I developed more of an interest in nutritional science. I started reading a lot about it. And I just love the idea of using food as medicine, like using the ingredients and the plants that we eat to heal ourselves. So like every 18-year-old, I wanted to be pre-med, obviously, and wanted to use that kind of food as medicine as a doctor. So I ended up going to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, to study nutritional science. When I got there, I quickly realized that most people don't have access to healthcare or they are underinsured. And even if you are the privileged and lucky enough to be insured, you maybe spend 30 minutes to an hour a year with your doctor, and who really like listens to them. So I developed more of an interest in like, okay, if I really want to make an impact on community and public health, I probably should pivot towards like the public health realm and the more community engaged realm. So that's where I ended up applying for my master's in public health and coming back to North Carolina. to do that at UNC Chapel Hill with a concentration in dietetics as well. So that was, I graduated Cornell in 2020 and I graduated UNC at 2022 last year. And last year I was also applying to PhD programs because I was also interested in research. So looking at why certain marginalized and vulnerable populations have lower access to food, and with a specific interest in Asian American and BIPOC populations, thinking about the cultural implications of food, right? Because we talk about like food insecurity and how many miles people live from a certain grocery store, but we would never really, and we're starting to talk about it a little bit more in public health, but we very rarely talk about like the cultural implications of food or the other reasons why food is important for us, not only for our bodies, our physical health, but for our mental health, for our communal health, for the environment. So that's where I started to think, I don't know if I want to do academia right now because it's very siloed and very not accessible to a lot of people. Their communications is very like verbal or written. And as a painter, I felt like my form of communication was restricted in that way. So even though I got into like all of the programs that I wanted to, I ended up declining my offers, which was like one of the scariest things I've ever done, and really want to pursue arts more fully. So I still have like a full-time job. I still have like 2 other jobs, but I'm very dedicated now to like a interdisciplinary career in both public health research and art. So that's just like a little bit of background on where I came from. So after I graduated UNC, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I ended up applying to the residency program at Durham Art Guild, and I ended up getting it, which was insane and scary and amazing. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to explore more of these concepts around like food and identity. So that was 6 months last year between July and December. So that was an incredible time where I was really dedicated to that project. And then following that, and I'll talk a little bit more about the work I did there. Following that, I ended up applying to and getting into the Emerging Artists Residency Program at Artspace, which is a full year program. So I'm here between January 2023 to December 2023. And it's been an incredible experience. I've gotten so much exposure there between me and the community, between me and like art administrative people, even NCMA, and the community of artists there are incredibly, obviously talented, hardworking, down to earth, always interested in like learning from other people, but also like providing resources and support. It's just been an amazing time, and I've loved my time here. So yeah. I'll go a little bit more into my work, but first I just kind of want to talk about medicine in general. So like Oliver said, I'm exploring kind of the differences in perspectives of like medicine and food and nutrition between the West and the East. So if you just Google medicine, this is the definition that comes up. It says it's a science or practice of the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of disease, or a compound or preparation used for the treatment or prevention of disease, especially a drug or drugs taken by mouth. So I just kind of want to sit with that and invite you to sit with that as well for a little bit. When you think about medicine, what do you think about? For me, and I've asked this question in different workshops and with different people. For me, it's both like the Tylenol and like the Advil that I take when I have a cold. It's also like the multivitamins I take on a semi-regular basis, but it's also like ginger for me. It's also red dates and goji berries and black sugar, things that are food and things that are actually what my mother would tell me to eat when I was like about to get my period or have period cramps, or like when I have like low blood or iron. And when I asked this to other people as well, a lot of things came up that I didn't even think about. So like people told me the sun, you know, like when I'm feeling down or like when I'm like not feeling my best, I go outside and I literally touch grass and I feel the sun in my skin, and I get not only like from a nutrition standpoint, like vitamin D, but like I get energy in like my spirit and my mental health. Some people said like their pillow, their sleeping. Other people said like an incense that they burn when they want to relax or feel more in touch with themselves and their body. So it's really been an incredible journey for me in the past few years to de decolonize what medicine and nutrition and health means for people, and really look at it more in an expansive and community and network-based approach rather than just like individual organs and individual systems and individual bodies. Yeah, so that was kind of like the thinking in my mind in the past like year or two, and it's really developed what I'm trying to challenge in both research and art. So during my time at Durham Art Guild, this was a project I was working on. It was called Yin Yang, which is the Mandarin word for nutrition. It was kind of a play on words because it kind of sounds like the Taoist philosophy of yin and yang, which is, if you're not familiar, you can Google it, but it's basically that symbol, that circular symbol that's like divided between the white and the black. And it's really talking about like two opposing but complementing forces in the universe, in your body, in the environment, in food. So when it comes up in traditional Chinese medicine, this concept of yin and yang really means like a balance between rest and activity, or stress and quietness, or hot and cold foods, or spicy and cooling foods. Everybody has a different body composition, and everybody needs certain different things. And it also comes up in identity, I feel like, you know, there's like a balance between masculine and feminine, or things like that. So this was the first piece that kind of sparked my interest in doing this sorts of things. So this piece is called pomelo. It's me holding a pomelo, which is, if you don't know, a gigantic citrus fruit, literally like the size of your head. It's very similar to a grapefruit, but I think it tastes a lot better. But this is like a fruit that has, one, it's like one of my favorite fruits, but also fruit has like a double meaning, I think, for me. For one, fruit is very often used as like a symbol of like femininity, fertility, sexuality. And for me, as like an asexual, gender nonconforming individual, I always felt a little disconnected from my body. All of like the feminine aspects that I either didn't feel belonged on me, or like I felt like other people put certain expectations on me and my body because I was socialized in a certain way. So that's been like an issue for me to grapple with, but also fruit has a meaning of a lot in Asian households. So there's a trope that your Asian parents will never say "I love you" to you. They'll just hand you a bowl of like cut fruit, which is very on brand for my mom. Like she's not a touchy-feely kind of person. Like she didn't start hugging me until like maybe like 2 years ago, which is fine. But like whenever we had arguments or wherever like there was like, you know, things going on, instead of like us like verbalizing I'm sorry or like talking about it later, she would just hand me a bowl of like cut fruit or like peeled apples or like pomelo. And that was her form of like showing that she loved me and she still cared for me, because physical health and physical well-being is very important for Chinese culture. And knowing that your loved ones are cared for and nourished and are eating well is how they kind of show that. So for me, this piece meant, even though I tried to come out to her as like asexual and gender nonconforming, she didn't really understand that, which is fine. I understand there's like generational, cultural, and like on top of that, like language barriers between us. But she would also always like still try to care for me through fruit. So this piece was kind of talking about me grappling with all of those things And I actually showed this at the Asian American Center at UNC, where I curated their first all Asian American student art exhibit. And I thought, me being asexual, I didn't think anybody would really understand or relate to my piece. But I actually got a lot of amazing feedback. A lot of students came up to me and said like they completely resonated with like the gender and the sexuality and the family dynamics of it all, and they really connected with it, which made me feel extremely touched. And I was like, wow, if even in like the small amount of like students who like are coming to the exhibit in North Carolina of all places, like related to this, like what other kind of stories are out there? What other kind of Asian American experiences through food could we explore? Because I didn't think I had a lot of representation of like my own identity and experience in the art world here. So that's where I kind of want to explore that a little bit more. So yeah, these are some of the pieces that I worked on in my exhibit. These were talking more about like the Western Eastern perspectives of nutrition. So I'll start on the left with tofu here. These are all oil paintings on wood panels, and these are all 24 by 24 inches. And then celery is 24 by 36. So tofu is in Western nutrition oftentimes seen as a substitute for dairy. So if you know anything about nutrition in like the US, if you ever grew up like learning about the food pyramid or like My Plate Now, you would know that there are distinct food categories that they want everybody to eat. So those are grains, proteins, fruit, vegetables, and namely dairy. So dairy is very heavily emphasized in Western nutrition, mainly for protein, calcium, and vitamin D. But if you actually look at the global population, about 60 to 70% of people are lactose intolerant or cannot digest lactose in adulthood. And most of those people are Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latinx, and Asian. So it's interesting that in the West, they only take the white perspective of everybody needs to be eating dairy, even though they completely ignore that a lot of people literally just can't. So fortified soy products like tofu and soy milk are seen as like, they're still included in the dairy category, but they're seen as like inferior substitutes. So if you ever talk to a dietitian, oftentimes they'll be like, oh yeah, you could eat like the soy product, but really the best case scenario is dairy. And I just think that's ridiculous. There are so many populations globally that don't include dairy in their diet, but are still extremely healthy, have good bone health, are fine. You can get calcium, protein, and vitamin D from other sorts of food sources. But for this piece, I also kind of want to talk about like the other ways and reasons why we might be eating certain things and how we see food. And for this was like gender, masculinity, and femininity. So if you ever talk to like a gym bro, sometimes they'll say like, oh, I don't want to be eating soy because like, the estrogens in it will give me man boobs. And sometimes women will avoid soy or be a little bit scared of it because they think the estrogens in it will increase the risk of like breast cancer or other things like that. So this comes from a falsely held belief that a compound called phytoestrogen in soy will interact with the body like the human estrogen. So phytoestrogen is basically a molecule that looks chemically similar to the human hormone estrogen, which is commonly associated with women's reproductive health, the feminine, I guess like the sexual development that is associated with feminism, like breast tissue, menstruation, things like that. But if you actually look at the science, what phytoestrogen does, it will bind to like the estrogen receptors in your body, and it will block too much estrogen from binding those receptors. So it actually is protective against the negative impacts of too much estrogen, because too much estrogen can actually increase risk of breast cancer. But phytoestrogens can't. It's actually protective against that. And it's completely not true that it will cause breast tissue development in men, because I don't know, East Asians literally eat soy products like in everything. So there's not like a billion Asian men walking around with boobs. So yeah, this piece was kind of talking about how socially held beliefs on sexuality and gender influence and sometimes wrongly influence how we see certain foods. And it also talks about like that Western perspective of sometimes the way we view food very much mirrors how we view people. How if there's something is unknown, like tofu or some sort of like marginalized community, we either completely avoid it because we don't understand it, or we try to manipulate it into something else. So yeah, this is like one of my favorite pieces, and I think a lot of people have resonated with it. I also love asking people what they think it is, because some people don't see it as tofu. Some people have said cheese. I've gotten bread, a sponge, polenta, all sorts of things. I think it's interesting what people see in it. So yeah. The second one in the middle is my ginger piece. So the character in the middle is the Mandarin word for qi, which is a concept in traditional Chinese medicine. It basically means like heat or energy in the body. Everybody has it, but some people have different levels. So some people have a lot of qi, some people have less. And this one was actually talking about my own health journey. So I had some health issues in the past few years that were just not getting resolved from my like 6+ years of nutrition education in the West. And my mom was just really worried about me. And finally, like after like literally begging me to see a traditional Chinese doctor, I finally went to see one last year. Turns out that I have a very cold body. So meaning I have like a low amount of qi. So what that kind of looks like for me has been, I typically have like very cold hands and feet. I have very poor blood circulation. I get cold very easily. And she basically told me I just didn't have a lot of blood in my body, and that was kind of like manifesting in these symptoms. So what she told me to do was eat foods that were warming and try to avoid foods that were cooling. So what does that look like? Foods that have different sorts of energies to them. So like warming foods are ginger, molasses, black sugar, red dates, beets, a lot of meat and dairy, spices, cinnamon, things like that. And a lot of cooling foods are like raw fruits and vegetables, celery, things like that. So after she told me that, I switched up my diet, trying to incorporate these kind of foods. I also took some herbs that she prescribed to me. And in literally, I'm not joking, like 4 months, like my symptoms were getting a lot better. And it was like crazy to me because I just like, I don't know, I had the belief that like, oh, this is like not evidence-based, or like, this is not like real science. This is just like made up stuff. Cause that's what I was taught in school, that like anything that wasn't quote unquote Western evidence-based, that wasn't published in a peer-reviewed journal, that wasn't a randomized control trial, wasn't true. And this personal journey really made me think like, oh, a lot of Eastern Black indigenous knowledge about nutrition and medicine and health have literally been developed and perfected over time for literally thousands of years. And how do we not see that as like science or truth? And why do we only see the Western science that's literally only been in existence for the past few hundred years as like the definitive truth? And not to say that Western medicine isn't useful in many cases, right? If you have a bacterial infection, no amount of ginger is gonna cut it. Like you still need an antibiotic. If you need a like open heart surgery, you still need that. But why do we not have both options for people to choose? And why don't we look at other sorts of traditions and cultures and look outside of just whatever we believe and see that as truth as well? So yeah, this was a very emotional piece for me to make, but I think I really like it as well. And then celery is also kind of talking about like the cold and the hot. So if you were around like health crazes around like 2017, you would know about like the celery juice craze. It was popularized by I think a white man, and it was kind of seen as this like health elixir that was going to solve all your problems. And maybe for some people it does. If you have a very like hot body with a lot of inflammation, eating something like a raw celery juice might, be beneficial. Eating celery might just be beneficial. I don't think there's anything in particular that's like special about celery, but it is a cooling food and it does like kind of like cool down the body, reduce inflammation. But for me, it would have probably been like terrible for me because me already having a cold body, if I were to like chug celery juice all day, it would probably make my symptoms even worse. So this piece was just talking about like certain foods are marketed in the West as being like superfoods and like just blanketed prescribed for everybody instead of like looking at individuals' specific needs and specific bodies and adjusting recommendations for individuals. So I just loved how like Eastern medicine kind of was personalized in that way and really made you slow down and reflect on your own body and your own needs rather than just like consuming all of this like media and like capitalistic kind of consumption of like just eat a lot of this one food that's trendy right now. And then I'll just talk a little bit more about some of the other pieces I did for this exhibition as well. So part of the my practice now is that I wanted to be more participatory and community driven. So what that looks like for me is collaborating with individuals in my community that I feel like have like a really compelling story. So here I interviewed three of my friends. In Roselle, this is Riri Wei. In the middle, this is Lisa Pham, and then on the very right is Zhang Lei. And during the interview process, from my qualitative research background, I was very much taught to like, as the authority researcher, develop my research question, develop my research, my interview questions, find people that I think need to be researched, ask those questions, interview them, and then present the findings in whatever I interpret. And for me, it was very much like weird hierarchy gatekeeping. It was very much like I'm the one with the authority, the knowledge, the audience and the platform, and I'm going to share your story in whatever I interpret. And I just didn't like that. So I want to bring my research background into my art, but I didn't want to bring that kind of baggage with me. So these collaborations were very much, it was like an informal interview about their stories or histories or identities or relationship to food. But I didn't actually like stage any of this. It was very much like, what kind of stories do you want to tell and what do we both connect with? Because another thing is that like Asian Americans are not a monolith. Just because I'm a Chinese American does not mean I have any sort of like inkling as to their experiences as a Korean or a Vietnamese American. So the stories here are developed in a sense that like we both had a connection or both had a similar experience or understanding of whatever we're talking about, just so that like I'm not painting or presenting something that I just have no idea or don't understand. So the one on the very left, Roselle, is my friend Riri Wei. She is a Karen refugee who is now the executive director of Transplanting Traditions Community Farm in Carborough. And this is her with her favorite plant, which is the Roselle. It is also called hibiscus, I think, in America and certain other parts of the world. But this plant has special meaning for her and her family because it was a plant that they also grew in Burma or Myanmar, and when they were living in a refugee camp in Thailand, and now they can grow this here as well in North Carolina. And they actually use like the whole plant, so the buds that they use for like tea, and then you can actually like cook down the leaves into like a really sour and savory dish that you pair with rice. So yeah, I really want to paint her as well. And then the middle is my friend Lisa. She just graduated with her master's in public health at UNC as well, concentrating in nutrition. And for her as a Vietnamese American, Spam has always been a complicated food. If you know anything about the history of the Vietnam War, you would know that like American troops came over there to like help with the democratic side of the conflict. And they came with a lot of rationed food. And part of it was a lot of canned meats, instant noodles, a lot of processed food. And one of those things was Spam. And when your entire country is demolished by war and impoverished, and there's no more economy, and you can't grow your own food anymore because everything's bombed, you have to just eat what is given to you. And these troops just left over all the Spam. So Spam was incorporated into their culture's diets. But when you learn about nutrition now in the West, there's a lot of judgment that goes on. And part of it is what they call ultra processed meat. So things like Spam, hot dogs, bologna, bacon, things like that are seen as detrimental to your health. And there's a lot of like, oh, if you feed your kids this, you're giving them cancer and you're doing all the things. And when she heard this, she was just like, well, you guys kind of brought this on us. So I don't know what you're telling me. But her, just like me, kind of just believed what we were taught in school because these were institutions telling us information. And we kind of had a lot of judgment on what our parents brought us up on and that kind of stuff. So her now developing a better relationship with Spam and how her mom used to cook it with tomato and eggs over rice has been a really healing process for her. So I thought that was just a beautiful story to tell. And then on the right is my friend Jang. She's also Vietnamese American, just graduated last year with a bachelor's in East Asian history, I believe, from UNC. But she is queer and very interestingly, she was more embarrassed to tell me that she does not like a lot of Vietnamese food. So when she was growing up, her mom would make this noodle dish with me, which I believe is an egg noodle that's a Vietnamese word for it. But she would make this dish with these noodles that was very like traditionally Vietnamese, and Jang would just like not like it. So she would request these noodles plain and melt American cheese on it and call it a meal. I thought that was funny because when I was growing up, my mom would make us this dish called jjajangmyeon, which is noodles with like a really savory like black bean sauce on it. And I like it now, but like when I was growing up, I just didn't. So like I would request noodles plain with ketchup on it as like pasta sauce, which I thought was funny. But I thought my conversation with her was really interesting because she felt more shame with like not enjoying Vietnamese food with her family, that she ever felt shame about being queer. And that just kind of speaks to our experiences as Asian Americans, that like when you don't have like the land or the language or a lot of your family to fall back on in terms of like connecting with your culture, sometimes all you have is food. And if you don't partake in it, sometimes you feel like you're not part of that identity or culture. And now me being vegan, and I went vegan pretty early at 18, I very much felt at the beginning that I didn't feel Chinese enough or something because I wasn't eating their food. But now kind of looking back, I understand that like veganism and vegetarianism has a lot of roots in East Asian culture and Buddhism and other sorts of like non-white cultures. So it's been really a cool process to like unpack that as well and say that like just because I'm vegan doesn't mean it impacts like my identity or how I identify or how you see me. So yeah, I also thought it was funny to just paint her eating noodles. So that was that. Yeah, so that was most of the work I've been working on the past like year or so. But what's next for me? I want to continue this like series of like collaborating with Asian American stories around food, but now focusing more or just focusing exclusively on queer Asian American stories. Because I think when you think about like Asian American art and queerness, there's a lot of like emphasis on like the hubs, right? Like New York, Boston, the West Coast, and kind of the queer Asian American scene in the South is just completely ignored. And just for like my own sake, I would love more of me reflected back to me on a wall. So yeah, I'm doing that. I want to explore more on soy-based foods and how people kind of perceive them and what you see in them. So kind of continuing that series on tofu. And then I'm just doing more community-driven events and opportunities and providing more opportunities to BIPOC and Asian American and queer individuals who maybe have felt left out in the art scenes around the area. Um, yeah, so one of the examples right now is a project I'm doing with two of my friends. We're calling it Asian Joy, celebrating Asian American communities across North Carolina. And this is a three-part project we're doing in the next year. So we are going to be collecting oral histories from Asian Americans in the South, um, emphasizing the idea of how they bring joy to themselves, their communities, and their surroundings. So that could look like through art, I don't know, rock climbing, food, anything like that. We want to invite them back afterwards and through creative workshops and gatherings, develop a shared story or like a timeline and have them help create a mural design with us. And that we're going to be installing that mural onto a location in the Triangle area. Currently, we're looking at walls in the Durham, Cary, Raleigh area. And for me, this means a lot because, like I said, there's like a lot of emphasis on hubs like Chinatowns, little Saigons, little Tokyos, Koreatowns in the big metropolitan areas in the Northeast and the West Coast. But for the Asian American community here, we don't have like a physical community hub where we feel like we have roots in, even though we do have roots here, we have a lot of history to tell. So for me, mural making and mural installation kind of gets that idea of permanence and representation and exposure of like showing that we are here, we are a community, and this is our story, and we would love you to learn more about it. Yeah, so these are my lovely teammates. So me on the left, and then Sophie To, who's a PhD candidate in health behavior at UNC Gillings. And then Ina Liu, who is a public health pharmacist at UNC Health, and also an amazing painter and community activist. So I'm super excited to work with these amazing individuals and more to come on that while we get that project started. Yeah, so that is my presentation. Thank you so much for learning more about my work. If you want to connect with me, I have a website where you can see more of my paintings, a little bit more background on the artwork that I shared, and then also my CV if you want to look at that. And I'm also on social media, so Instagram mainly, and there's my handle. Most of the work that I just shared with you is currently on display at CAM, the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh. It's in a group show on the lower level, and it'll be up there till September. But other than that, you can find me at Artspace. I'm in Studio 215A on the second floor. I'm usually there most days, so definitely come by, peek in, and if I'm there, I'd love to talk. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Isabel. That was awesome. And let me get ready and ask you a couple questions. So You definitely already kind of touched on this, but I think I'd like to give you a chance to expand a little bit on it. So you talked about your background in nutritional science and public health, and I was wondering how that's influenced your artistic practice, and more specifically, how do you see the intersections between art and health equity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my public health research background definitely has a huge influence on my art practice. Like I said, I want my how I engage with subjects or communities to be very much horizontal and very participatory and engagement rather than just like me coming in as like a storyteller and like telling somebody else's story or like positioning them in a way where I'm showing how they want to be represented. I definitely want to engage them in a way where we feel like partners and have them really lead in how they want to be represented. So part of that looks like I mentioned, like the interviewing process and checking in with them and like having them kind of lead the direction of what the story and how they are presented in that certain case. Another part of that is trying to get people to be paid equitably, which has been a struggle.
Mhm.
Because I also need to be paid, but like also want to pay people for their time. So every time I'm like writing a grant or like getting funding, definitely focusing on getting putting in money for people to get paid for their time in terms of the research, the interview, and their involvement as well.
Mhm. Um, so your work explores ethnic, sexual, and gender identity through food, history, and relationships. How do you approach these complex themes and narratives in your art?
Yeah, so I can only speak to like my own experiences as like asexual and gender nonconforming. So that's where I've started. It's really been starting around like where I've come from and like my histories with food and my own identity and journey with that. And then from that, presenting that and sharing that with other people, having conversations with people around their experiences with that as well. I would love to learn more about like the history of like East Asian and like Chinese like um cultures around like gender and sexuality. It's hard for me
Mhm.
because I don't speak or read Mandarin, so that's my own problem. But yeah, learning more about that would be interesting as well. But really, it's through like people's experiences and oral histories and engaging with the community.
So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on your residencies at DIG or at Artspace or both of them kind of at once. How has this kind of shaped your artistic development and the exploration of identity through food stories?
Yeah, it's been crazy, man. Like the residencies of both DAG and Artspace have like I feel like skyrocketed my
Hmm.
involvement in art. Just for one, like the there's like such amount of like power there is to have like a dedicated space to make art. Because like before that, I was literally in like I think like a 300 square foot like studio apartment, like painting on the floor in a corner. And
Hmm.
now that I have like space to actually like explore things and like having space to like have a mental space to just like explore ideas and like to paint on my own has been incredible. But obviously also like the exposure and engagement with community. I've loved how like Artspace in particular, but also DAG have been incredibly open for the public, for people to just
Hmm.
walk in. I've had like amazing conversations and connected with people just from like people walking in and getting involved with community that way has been amazing. Both places have been incredibly supportive in having spaces and opportunities and the openness for if I want to do like a community engagement event, having space and the resources there as well.
Hmm.
So it's really been providing like opportunity, resources, and space for me to really get engaged and talk to the public.
Hmm. So I mean, you work a full-time job and you just completed two residencies. How have you balanced like your professional work life and your professional artistic work life and doing so much, honestly?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. I will say first that like I'm extremely privileged that like my full-time job is a remote job that I do
Hmm.
at home.
Mhm.
And I live pretty close to my residency at Artspace.
Mhm.
So it's really just been looking like efficiency. I don't know. I just like do all my work at home for my day job, and then
Mhm.
after work, between like 4 to like 8 p.m. going to the studio and
Mhm.
just like making sure I have like time to paint. But for me, it's been really interesting kind of like juggling all these, trying to like be efficient as possible in the terms of like trying to connect all the dots. So my full-time job is in communications, but it's for like a public health research organization at UNC.
Mhm.
So like really trying to draw in like those communication skills into like how I present information or how I engage with people or how I like
Mhm.
publicize things. And then trying to draw back like my art practices back into my job in terms of like how I interact with people, even like social events, trying to like
Mhm.
build community within our own organization. So it's really
Mhm.
like trying to balance both and like bring in the things I've learned from both to like help everybody and everything.
Mhm. Oh, that's cool. So in I believe it was the DIG show, the uh, yin yang nutrition. You kind of play a lot with this idea of kind of opposing forces and the balance of opposing forces, such as I don't know, like shame, pride, responsibility, opportunity. So how do you see like this kind of balance of like I was wondering if you kind of expand on that idea a little bit more and how that reflects in the identities of Asian Americans and their relation to food.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, I think for Asian Americans specifically who have like immigrant parents, there's always like a weird balance of um different things. So being steeped in like in the household of like growing up in like Asian or like Eastern culture, but then also like going to school and like trying to connect with like all of like your white and your non-Asian friends.
Mhm.
And like the Western culture is always like weird because you gotta like switch it up and like
Mhm.
code switch and like also like a weird feeling of like acceptance or like non-acceptance in both.
Mhm.
And then I think when it comes to food, it gets amplified in that way because like there's always like that trope of like the smelly lunchbox story of like you bringing like your family's meal to
Mhm.
like lunch and then people think it's like weird and like you feel shame. But I want to move past that a little bit because as much as it is a story that I resonate with, I don't think
Mhm.
it's like the only story to tell. And having that balance, also like sorry, I'm just like rambling at this point, but like
That's fine.
also like I think there's a lot of like expectations put on Asian kids, not only from their family but from like outside expectations of like
Mhm.
being studious and being quiet and being a doctor or whatever, and like trying to balance that with like whatever you're feeling inside of like
Mhm.
wanting peace and rest and wanting to be artistic and wanting to express yourself in that certain way and just like wanting to be human and seeing it, being seen as an individual. I think we're like trying to balance all of those, at least for me. And those are kind of like the things I want to explore.
So, what kind of motivated you to incorporate traditional Chinese medicinal practices and kind of contrast them against Western nutritional standards, both in your research and in your paintings?
Yeah. So like I mentioned in my talk, I think it was mainly my health concerns that I dealt with
Mhm.
about a year ago. I think that experience made me really like put the nail in the coffin of like Western nutrition is
Mhm.
like not helping a lot of people or it's like missing
Uh-huh.
a lot. I think the ways that we see what is science or what is truth or what is evidence is very limited here. It's like if it's not published in a peer-reviewed journal or if it's not um, something that's like objectively true in terms of like statistics or like quantitatively measured, that it's not real.
Mhm.
And if you really, and it's also like a little like patriarchal and misogynistic, like the knowledge that is in a lot of like indigenous Black and Asian cultures in terms of like nutrition medicine have really been passed down by women or like women identifying people. And if you contrast like what women's health looks like in the East and the West, it's like very stark. So if you ever go to the doctor and you tell them like any sort of like symptom of like women's health, be it cramps, menstruation, whatever, they'll literally just like prescribe you a birth control pill and that's it. But in the East, there are like so many different things, right? Like you can think about like ginger teas and like cinnamon and honey and liver and like all of these things that like are used and understood in women's health, and like nothing is understood in the West because it's been developed by white men. So even in that case, I think it's just interesting to look at it through that lens. Yeah.
And so do you find that you run into these same walls professionally as well?
Like what walls do you
Like
mean?
like the walls of, I guess, the line between Eastern and Western medicine, the different schools of thought.
Yeah, I think in school we were just told that like that stuff is not real, like that's not science. Like you can like entertain your clients in terms of like, oh, you want to be respectful of their culture, but it's always like shrouded in like, oh, this is cultural, it's not real, like if that
Right.
makes sense. So in that case, it like made me feel like, okay, so you don't actually like see me as like like you don't see these people as like people, you just see them as like, oh, we'll just like entertain them. For me, that kind of made me want to leave the nutrition field a little bit. I am seeing like a lot of more conversation with that, but it's just hard because like 90% of dietitians are white females. So like it's hard to like understand a different perspective if you don't hold that perspective.
Which, I mean, this sort of ties into what you're doing at Artspace, since you're talking about community, and I did want to ask you a little bit more about that. So you were kind of talking about how you're focusing on using community-driven art to support the well-being of Asian American creatives and communities in North Carolina. I was wondering if you could, I mean, you already really definitely kind of touched on this, but tell us a little bit more about your goals and the initiatives of that. Is that like a part of a broader kind of?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So the more I've talked to like Asian Americans and BIPOC people in general, around here, it's more like there's been like barriers for them to be creative. Like, right, when you're like a kid and like either your parents or like societal expectations or like trying to like prove something to people, you end up just like not like you end up like as a kid being a very creative person wanting to pursue arts, but then like because of all these factors, you're like, oh, I don't think I'm like this is not for me. This is not like I need to be doing something more for like my family or these expectations. So I'm gonna be a doctor, be a lawyer, or like pursue these like higher academic credentials. And then they lose that practice and that connection to themselves and their art. And there's just not enough dedicated space and opportunities for these people. And for me and my community, so my larger mission, I think, is to create those opportunities and have them seen as like, if you want to pursue arts as like a profession, that's great. But also if you just want to like paint a flower and like have a space where you feel comfortable doing that, you should have that sort of opportunity. And that extends between like children to teens to adults and older people. So I think for me, that's my bigger mission of like creating these opportunities and spaces dedicated for Asian American and BIPOC people in general. I'll just say like my lofty goal in like 10 years is to create some sort of like center or organization or network for that. And create maybe like residencies or like grants or opportunities, especially money for these kind of people, and provide that space for my community.
And so you're talking about kind of like, creating a space for like dialogue and reflection with these people. And I kind of feel like the audience certainly does have a kind of participatory role in your work. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit more also on how like you kind of create that environment with the people. Because it sounds to me like you use almost like the public health processes of, doing like interviews and background screenings. And it feels like, and that's like a really interesting idea to me, that you're kind of combining these two like processes together.
Yeah, I think it's still a work in progress. But yeah, I think because I've loved qualitative research so much, I've like unconsciously brought all of those things. But like I mean, I don't bring them like a consent form and like do IRB approval and all that shit. But outside of that, yeah, it does like do look like an interview, but I try to make it as like non-hierarchical as possible. I never want to, I don't come in saying like, oh, this is like my project and I just want to interview you and do a painting of you. It's very much like, I want to learn from you and I would love for you to learn from me and just like develop a relationship. It really is, yeah, like relationship developing more than anything. Because there have been certain times where I've interviewed people and I've really been excited about working with them and doing a portrait, and they just don't want to. They like for whatever reason, or it just doesn't work out. They have schedules. They have other sorts of like reasons why they might not want to, and I just have to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, I want to invest in the individual and their well-being and their community over like whatever like silly art project I'm doing. So it's been more of a process of like investing in people and community rather than like, I want to present you in my painting for a show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it feels like a really interesting, almost critique of the sort of research and design process in general. Which
I mean, you
I
said
like.
it.
Yeah. Um, all right. I was wondering if you could share any memorable stories about how your art has impacted individuals or communities, particularly in their relation to food, justice, and cultural identity.
Yeah, I think every time I explain the tofu piece, people have
Yeah.
some sort of reaction to that. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's either like, oh, I have heard these sorts of things about
Yeah.
tofu and I never thought of it that way, or like, oh, I never thought about it that way, but like it's very
Yeah.
interesting to talk about it. Because even me being like vegan, I think tofu is always seen as like, you like press it or manipulate in a certain way to make like fried
Hmm.
chicken or like salmon or whatever, which is fine. Like I like a good like fried chicken tofu sandwich, but like it's also like it should just be like it's supposed to be mushy. Like it doesn't have to be crispy all the time. So yeah, I think that piece resonates with a lot of people. And then I think the pomelo piece also does. I think for a
For
lot of
sure.
women, it's interesting to see their reaction to like the fruit being used as like that kind of symbol for femininity
Hmm.
and their relationship with their bodies. But then also like I introduced like an aspect of colorism into that, because like I used to be very like um conscious about like the yellow undertones of my skin, and like I kind of
Hmm.
emphasize that in a certain way.
Hmm.
So I just love that like whenever I like talk about my work with other people, they also bring their own histories with food in their body to it, and I learned something in that process, and I think that's what the interesting part of it is. It's not just me sharing whatever it is, it's like them bringing in their perspectives and like us learning together.
Yeah, it's almost like a huge part of the actual piece happens before you paint it,
Hmm.
which I find fascinating. And beyond like the impact, I guess, it has on individuals, like kind of how do you see your art impacting the broader community? I guess in terms of social justice, equity, etc.
Yeah. I've been like tackling this question in my head for a while, because like I'm not lost that like these are literally just like paintings that like are not gonna like solve social issues. But I think for me the real impact is like the process rather than the product.
Uh-huh.
Which is why like yeah, I love painting these like oil paintings and like putting them in galleries and whatever, but that's not like really solving anything, because like who's gonna go to a gallery? Like no offense, it's just like richer white,
Yeah,
like wealthy
yeah,
people,
for
very
sure.
educated, but like for me, it's like the process of painting together, and like the process of like my project with the oral histories and developing a mural
Uh-huh.
together. Um, for me, that is like what is impactful, because like there's just not enough opportunities for people to just like relax and explore those parts of themselves. And I think for that, it's like very healing for me and like the community. And like that's where I've gotten like the most feedback of like, this was like incredible. This was like an opportunity I've never had before. And got them back into like a love of like creating and like exploring themselves and their creativity. So I think that the process and like providing those opportunities is like what I want to do in terms of um giving back to the community.
Hmm. So I know rather soon, actually. You're going to leave and go probably go over to CAM and give a talk. I was wondering if you could maybe talk, like looking ahead, what are some of your other aspirations and future plans? You have any other upcoming projects or collaborations that you didn't touch on yet, or that you want to expand
Yeah.
on even? Yeah,
No, yeah, the CAM show is very, very exciting. That'll
of
be up
course.
until
Yeah,
September. I also have two pieces at BAE right now for their COSO
awesome.
show. Yeah, so that'll be, I have no idea how long that'll be up, so I don't know. Other than that, honestly, I've just been trying to like focus on making art right now and just
Uh-huh.
getting more of like inventory and a portfolio together. So
Uh-huh.
I don't actually have any upcoming shows after that that I can think of, but if I do, it'll definitely be on like the website and social media.
Awesome.
So I'm excited for that. But yeah, I'm in Artspace, so like whenever you want to stop by, I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming out to talk to us today. I super appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. Um, and yeah, I hope to see you guys back again next month. And I'm sorry that we could not be live this month, but yeah, I'll talk to everybody soon. And thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.